As much as you might try to take care of your hands, sometimes you get these things called musculoskeletal injuries. They're what we call not so friendly visitors, right? They could be carpal tunnel, tendonitis, a couple of things. They're called MSKs, and they're like those little grumpy complaints that our bodies make when we're not treating our hands and wrists right, which in construction happens all the time, unfortunately, which is why you got to take care. Have you ever experienced tingling, numbness, or maybe pain in your hands and wrists after a long day of work? Maybe you have a long drive afterwards and it really becomes noticeable. That's a warning sign that you might be experiencing an MSK injury. Carpal tunnel syndrome happens when that median nerve, which actually runs from your forearm into the palm of your hand, that becomes compressed or squeezed at the wrist. This can lead to tingling, numbness, or weakness in the hand and fingers. It's like your body's way of saying, hey, we should really give these hands a break. On the other hand, no pun intended, tendonitis is when the tendons in your hand or wrist become inflamed. That's often due to repetitive movements, and it causes pain, swelling, and tenderness, and that really makes it uncomfortable to move your hands and perform daily activities. So the good news is that you can take steps to prevent these injuries, but you should first understand the warning signs, and that will let you make smart choices about how you use your hands on a job site. That way, we can reduce the risk of developing carpal tunnel syndrome, tendonitis, etc. So here are some simple tips and tricks to make that happen. First, you should practice good ergonomics, right? Ergonomics is how you interact with your work environment, your tools, etc. Maintain proper posture and positioning while you're working with those tools, working with equipment. That can reduce strain on your hands and wrists. So let's say you're operating a wheeled loader, right? You can actually do your body damage if you're not sitting correctly, if you're not posturing yourself correctly. So even if you're sitting down while working, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're practicing good ergonomics. You can also use ergonomic tools and equipment. You know the difference between that dollar store tool and the high-end stuff, right? A lot of times it has to do with material strength, but also with the ergonomics of the tool. Then also make sure that you take regular breaks to stretch or rest your hands. Then of course you want to use that proper technique. I know you know your trade. You learned from the best, but did you really observe how to properly do things to keep yourself safe? Whether lifting heavy objects, using specific tools, using that correct technique that prevents unnecessary strain on your hands and wrists. All these little things that maybe you didn't pick up on as you were learning the trade. What about taking breaks? It's super important to give your hands and wrists a break from repetitive tasks, especially if there's a lot of vibration involved, if you're doing it for hours on end. Take regular breaks to stretch, move, and rest your hands, and that can help prevent overuse injuries. You also want to make sure that you're wearing protective gear. For instance, a lot of people don't like to wear gloves on the job site. Best piece of advice I can give you for hand safety, don't be afraid to wear gloves. There are actually times when you shouldn't wear gloves on the job site. An example would be if you're using an electric saw. So no glove is going to protect you from a rotating saw blade. Instead, it increases the likelihood that your hand's going to get pulled into the saw blade. Big no-no. You may have heard of cut-resistant gloves. Not gonna protect you from a saw blade. That would be for things like box cutters. When choosing whether or not to wear gloves for specific types of equipment, you should always refer to the manufacturer's guidelines. Specific equipment sizes and guard types may necessitate the use of gloves, or they may negate the need for gloves, or it may not be safe at all to use gloves. Remember also that the manufacturer guidelines are likely just going to talk about the operator's use of PPE, and so if you are a support person, your requirements for glove use may be slightly different. When in doubt, ask your supervisor. You can always reach out to OSHA. When you're working with machinery, tools, or possibly hazardous environments like, hey, the job site, you gotta wear appropriate protective gloves. This will help prevent cuts, scrapes, and other hand injuries. You're working with chemicals? Wear the right gloves. Working with tools with sharp edges? Wear the right gloves. You get the idea? Don't be afraid to wear gloves. What about strengthening and stretching? So engaging in hand and wrist exercises can actually help build strength and flexibility, and that reduces the risk of injury. So simple exercises like just squeezing a stress ball, Doing some wrist curls and finger stretches can go a long way. Also, eating a balanced diet, staying hydrated, super important on the job site, and getting that regular exercise can contribute to your overall hand and wrist health. It's also important to avoid smoking. I know you didn't want to hear that, but smoking impacts blood flow and increases the risk of hand and wrist injuries. You probably didn't think about that, did you?